The fat woman in front of me is a ruthless man. She cuts her husband and his mistress into pieces of meat and put them on the grill to eat. The FBI have surrounded him, but the fat lady continued to eat with gusto. In the end, she was sentenced to life imprisonment. In prison, she became a big sister. When she got bitten by a mosquito in her sleep, when she got up, she slapped her little sister in anger, but the fat lady soon got her comeuppance. That day a high school girl, Kaneko, turned herself in. She said she had killed a 5-year-old boy, but Kaneko wasn't the killer. Even the old detective knew she wasn't the murderer at all, but because of the pressure from the outside world, so they had to let Kaneko take the blame. After arriving at the crime scene, Kaneko grabbed a pillow, acting out the crime scene. In fact, on the way here, Kaneko looked up. There was a man cheering at him. Perhaps only Kaneko knew that this man was the real killer, and that he was just a scapegoat. In prison, Kaneko was a good man. He did all the dirty work. Everyone called him the kindly gold. But this was all a disguise for Kaneko. 13 years later, Kaneko was released from prison. At that time the priest gave him a piece of white tofu. He was given a piece of white tofu by the priest to be a clean man. But Goldie spilled the bean curd, because the first thing he did when he got out was to take revenge. There was no such thing as cleanliness. Then he went to the repair shop. He found his former cellmate. It turned out that while in prison, he was diagnosed with kidney failure. Luckily, Kaneko donated one of his kidneys to him. That's how he survived. Now Goldie asked him for help. His fellow inmates were obliged to do so. Goldie took out a book and ripped it out page by page and put together a map of weapons. Soon in a week's time, the cellmate had the weapon made. He told Goldie that the weapon had a short range, but it was very powerful. Now it was time to find the man to avenge 13 years of hatred. Girl's unwanted pregnancy. Seeing her teacher for help, but Ms. White is nice on the surface. In fact, she couldn't have children, so she hates children. When Kaneko gave birth, Mr. White killed a 5-year-old boy. He threatened Kaneko's child to help her take the blame, so Kaneko spent 13 years in jail for nothing. Then Kaneko found Mr. Beck's wife. She was the little sister who was bullied by the fat lady in prison. Jinzi couldn't stand it anymore, so he decided to get rid of the fat lady. First, he got close to her. She brought him food every day. What she didn't know was that Goldie would add bleach to the food every time, so the fat lady died as Jinzi fed her. After she was released from prison, Xiaomei wanted to repay Jiamjia, so she became legally married to Mr. Bai, so that she could get information for Kaneko. But all this was secretly photographed by the priest. The priest then gave the photos to Mr. Beck. It turned out that Mr. Bai was afraid that Mr. Jinzi would take revenge on her, so she arranged for the priest to monitor him. When she found out the truth, she was furious, so she found 2 assassins to kill them. So that night the killers ambushed Jiamjia. Goldie knew she was outnumbered, so he pretended to pass out. Then he was shot and taken away. On the other hand, Mr. White collapsed at the dinner table. It turned out that his wife had put poison in the meal. When Mr. Bai woke up again, Kaneko was staring at him with a deadly stare. Kaneko knew that Mr. Beck had committed more than one crime, but he had no remorse for what he had done, so Jiamjia was ready to make his life miserable. Kaneko shot him in the foot. The two then searched frantically through Mr. White's house. They found video evidence of his murder. Then Kaneko found the old detective. He told him everything. The old detective felt very ashamed. He knew that Kaneko had been wrongly accused, so he decided to help Kaneko get his revenge. Then the old detective contacted all the victims' families. Then, in front of everyone, he played the whole story of Mr. White's murder. The families watched the children, pleading for their lives. They were all very sad, but now they all turned their grief into anger. Then they discussed what to do with Mr. White, so they planned to finish him off on the spot. And the family's conversation was clearly heard by Mr. White. He was now terrified. It was already too late for regret. Then the old detective taught them how to use a knife. He also prepared a Macintosh for each of them, to prevent the blood from getting on them. And the family members each had a knife in their hands. They were ready to kill Mr. Bai by hand. Then the family members rushed into Mr. Bai's room. They went crazy on him. Finally, an old woman used a pair of scissors to end Mr. Bai's life. They then cleaned up the crime scene together. Then they buried him again. Finally they took a photo together, to prevent anyone from going out and denouncing the film. At the end, Kaneko made a blood cake out of Mr. White's blood. Made a blood black cake. After everyone had eaten the cake, Kim's 13 years of hatred had finally been avenged. This is a classic Korean revenge movie. Kind-hearted Jiamjia. The beautiful Jiamjia is threatened to be a scapegoat. He goes to prison. When he gets out of jail, he takes his revenge on Mr. Beck. This is both a gorgeous revenge play. It's also a play of bland redemption.